All right. So to begin this, I just wanted to ask, where did the Durant issue begin, and why? Do you what is the almighty reason that he ended up requesting that trade?
A lot of things within the organization. From what I understand, their coaching staff, specifically with guys that they let go or they're not returning, whether it was Adam Harrington and even, and this is more on the Kyrie Irving side, Eli Carter, guy who was an assistant coach in player development. And in addition to that, there were some other factors. When I talk about some of the coaching staff, another name, David Vanderpool is no longer a member of the Nets coaching staff. So there are factors there. In addition to that, Kyrie did not get his extension. He opted into the $30 million or $37 million deal. And so we'll see where that goes. But ultimately, I use the word on my Spotify Live, informational overload, just a lot of back and forth. He said, she said, we want this, they want that. And ultimately, there needs to be a level of, guys sitting down and having conversations. And I'm optimistic that the Nets, as an organization, and their basketball ops staff, as well as Kevin Durant, will have those conversations. I think it's one thing when Kyrie says something, but Kevin Durant is the face of that franchise. And so when he's speaking and when he was requesting something, it's a little different in a way that Kyrie and Ben Simmons and my just observations don't move the needle the same way. And so that's where we are.
So to follow up with that question, when it comes to the coaching staff, they already put out the list of the people that they pretty much have on the roster. Is that any recommendations based off of Kyrie and KD, or did they kind of just go off and do that on their own?
I can't speak to this current coaching staff. I can speak to coaching staffs in the past that I know Kevin and Kyrie have had input on. And sometimes the Nets say yes, sometimes they say no. I said this on Spotify Live last week. I talked about how, when Kevin and Kyrie came in, there was a request and a desire for Kevin Durant in the regards of Ty Lue in 2019 to be the coach of the Nets. I know that it was widely reported that was a Kyrie want. And I know that, in the past, when Kevin did want it, he and Ty Lue had a conversation, and it was more on the lines of, if this is what you and Kyrie and others want, get Kai on the phone. Let's kind of, work through certain things from the past. And from all indications on the Kyrie side, from folks that I've spoken with, Kai names Ty Lue, as well as David Blatt and Byron Scott as his three favorite coaches that he played for while he was in Cleveland. So, there's a respect, but it didn't happen. And then on the Kyrie side, I know that he wanted Phil Handy to be that next coach after they got rid of Kenny Atkinson as head coach. And ultimately, Steve Nash, from all indications, is more of a Sean Marks friend. An ally, and it went that way. But I do know that you asked me about input on Kai and Kevin. I know that there was a desire to potentially bring in Phil Handy as an assistant coach back in 2019, and I'm told that the Nets were not granted permission by the Los Angeles Lakers to make that happen. So they do take input even from a perspective of player personnel, bringing folks in. Iman Shumpert is a friend of Kyrie's, and he played on the Nets team. Jamal Crawford is a friend of Kevin Durant's and Kyrie. He played for the Nets in the bubble. Michael Beasley comes from the DMV area where Kevin Durant is from. So, there's input. Ultimately, the front office makes the final decision. And, every case is different. Like there's cases in Dallas, for example, where, Mark Cuban may be the owner, but he takes input from Jason Kidd on personnel decisions, adding different people. So every case is different. Every owner, every player situation is different. But I know coming in, there were some other areas where, Kai and Kevin were able to kind of dictate what they wanted. And, in this case, not so much this season, I don't think, as it relates to the assistant coaching staff. But that's where we are.
Okay. And with the Ty Lue talks, it seems like that was the most likely option based off of what you just said with Katie and Kyrie kind of, coming to talks with him. How close was that to happening, if and, if there was any discussions, what was it that kind of turned that idea off?
I don't know that Kai and Ty Lue spoke specifically about that issue. I know that it was reported like right before everything was shut down in 2020 that that was a Kyrie desire. And when I did some research on it, I was told that that wasn't a Kyrie desire. And now, a couple years later, speaking to those that I know well, I know that that was a Kevin Durant desire, as I mentioned. Would it have changed? I think Ty Lue was in a perfect situation as an assistant coach with the Clippers at the time. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, at that point in 2019, Ty was a potential Lakers head coaching candidate, and it really came down to money. I also know that in 2020, when things shut down, I had conversations with folks. I know that Sean Marks was considering Jason Kidd at a certain time when Jason Kidd was an assistant coach with the Los Angeles Lakers at the time. Ultimately, it didn't turn out that way. I know that Greg Popovich was discussed at points. I know that because of Sean Marks' ties to the Spurs, it's easily to point to that, but that didn't happen. Nash, had a relationship or has a relationship prior to his coaching time with the Nets with both Kevin and Kyrie, both as opponent. And then, Nash being an assistant with the Clippers, with the Warriors under Steve Kerr. So I know that I know also Kai played in Steve Nash's charity. I think it was kickball over the years. I've spent time with Kai where, he had just come back from playing in Nash's kickball charity event. And, this was back in 2014. So different time. This was, of course, before Nash coached him. But, I remember sitting down with him for lunch, and he talked reverently just about that he thinks the world of both Russell Westbrook and Steve Nash as players. Of course, this was in 2014. I remember we were sitting at the table talking, and he was just saying to me he didn't like how much people dogged Russell Westbrook and how much he liked him as a player, as a competitor, as a point guard. I don't know if that means so much, now, but I know their names have been mentioned in trade talks, but ultimately, as it relates to personnel and the things that you mentioned specifically about coaching, I don't know what would have changed, would have been different. I know Ty Lue was highly sought after, and it just so happened that, after the bubble, the Clippers went in a different direction and got rid of Doc Rivers. Doc slid over to Philadelphia, and, Ty Lue got the head coaching position with the Clippers, and I think he's done wonderful the last couple of years with injuries, either to Kawhi or Paul George or whomever else. So I just sat down with Terrence Mann of the Clippers last week, and he spoke reverently just about the Clippers organization and Ty Lue, and how excited he is to have both Kawhi and Paul George on the court at the same time, and they're hoping to make magic with John Wall. So, hindsight is always 2020, but I think in this instance, the Nets got who they got. I know Kenny Atkinson. I saw him in the spring, and he talked about how much he enjoys actually watching the Nets with Kai and Kevin, and he's happy to see them do well. And Kenny on his own, is going to greener pastures, winning a ring as an assistant with the Warriors. So, here we are now.
So with the Kyrie Optin, he opted into that 37.9 million. The reports came out today from Shams saying that he was fully committed when he opted in. Was the news about KD's trade request kind of in the air at the time that he had opted in, or did that kind of catch everybody off guard? Because it seemed like he opted in, planning on running it back with this team.
Well, if you paid attention to my reporting since a little bit before 4th of July weekend, those names, the names of the teams that, Kai was interested in going to, I will say that there was always a desire to come back to the Nets, but it just had to make sense as it relates to just their personnel and moving in the future. I don't want to speak for Kai. I don't want to speak for Kevin. I'll just speak of connecting dots and putting things together. I think I've been doing pretty good with this the last month, so I don't think I have jurisdiction to speak on it. I get the feeling that this is a leverage play, and that the Nets, Kai and Kevin, are going to have to meet somewhere in the middle, because the Nets have had conversations, but ultimately nobody was giving an offer that was to the Nets' liking from people that I've spoken to, not just on the players' side, but the organizational side. I tweeted this sometime this month. I tweeted a lot,
Yeah.
but basically, the way it was told to me is we're not giving up shit for bullshit. And that relates to KD and Kyrie at large. I'm sure you're going to clip this clip, but for context purposes, what I'm saying is basically they're not just going to give up junk just because that's what the other team wants. And you're seeing that in real time. As it relates to Shams and Woj's report, they're my colleagues. I will always respect my colleagues publicly and privately. Any conversation I might have with my friends is kitchen table talk. But as it relates specifically to the movement that was today, as far as the Celtics at large, I don't really think that that's really new news as it relates to them, because everybody's been reaching out to the Nets. But as it relates specifically to Kai and his movements based on Kevin, you also have to move from the premise that those two guys are still friends. I've hung out with them. I've partied with them. Everything they do is in step with one another. So I think for maybe people who aren't as privy or inclusive to what's going on, they may look at it differently. I still look at them as a packaged deal. And I think, and I know that even if they were to go elsewhere, they'd still try to find a way to play together as teammates, because I think they respect themselves, one another that much.
Okay. And with Kyrie's contract talks, there was a lot of talks about negotiations, trying to see if he'll get re-signed. KD was really pushing for him to get re-signed. What was it in the contract, if you know, that kind of never met the middle ground? Was it incentive based? Was it length of contract? Because I know length was an issue for a while, but a lot of people were throwing out the possibility of an incentive based contract. Was that something that was ever offered?
So from I'm not familiar on the everyday day-to-day, but I can speak in generalities of what were kind of the tug and pull, if you will, or the teeter-totter back and forth, was essentially the fact that number one, publicly negotiating numbers and worth of somebody's contract, and then having it disseminated to media and having people decide what that person is worth was quite frustrating to folks that are familiar with those discussions. Essentially, from the Irving perspective, I'm told is that when you look at what he did in 2019, before he was hurt, he hurt his shoulder and then had to sit out the rest of the year. And then the following year, COVID was an issue. And then ultimately him making his decision and his choice. The only time that Kyrie kind of kiltered the other way was when many people weren't privy to why he ultimately sat out around the January 6th time with the insurrection. And ultimately, I put out a tweet that kind of blew up the internet that day. What people aren't necessarily as privy about it, and what isn't magnified a ton, is that during that process, his wife was pregnant. He was out on paternity leave. And in addition to that, even when he sat out and then ultimately went to his sister's birthday party, the Nets were aware of where he was. It was just the attention that it drew, him being at that gathering with his close family. And ultimately somebody who wasn't even direct family was at that party and videoed it, and it kind of blew up. I'm not defending him. I'm just stating the facts as they lay. And then you look at this season, specifically with the COVID mandates in New York City. He was ready to play. The Nets didn't want him to play away games. And ultimately, they didn't want that distraction. And so when you go and you look at the numbers, I was speaking with someone and we kind of went over the numbers, the amount of games he missed due to the Nets not wanting him around the team. That wasn't to him being ill. That wasn't to him breaking any laws or being on a police blotter. That was the Nets' personal choice. Yeah. And so when you start kind of building a case as to why we don't want to pay Kyrie the money, from what I'm understanding, it's a matter of public perception of the games he missed. But ultimately, it comes down to what he did when he was on the court. When he played in the playoffs last year, they did lose to the Bucks. James Harden got hurt. Kai ended up getting hurt. Kevin carried them and was a 3-pointer away, his toe on the line from going to the next round and potentially playing the Hawks in the conference finals last season. But, so to answer your question directly, from the Nets perspective, I gather that it's more along the lines of games missed. But when you kind of do that math about the games missed, the games were missed because the Nets told them that they didn't want him to play. And some injuries in 2019 with his shoulder. But, during that time, he carried the team without Kevin Durant.
Yeah.
And then in year two, they lost in the playoffs. So I think that the COVID portion of it is the part that kind of gets murky, and everybody is deriving their opinions based upon that. That's what I gather from just asking the right questions.
Yeah. Plenty of times in a couple of our group chats, one of the tweets actually blew up a while ago when somebody shared it. But when it comes
Congratulations on your success.
I appreciate it. Thank you. But yeah, so we know that he's, for the most part, when he comes into that chat, he's been very vocal on, wanting to play for the Nets. He's stated multiple times that, he wants to be here. There's nowhere else he'd rather be. Have you ever had a conversation with him regarding, possibly what it would look like down the road? Did he really want to stay with the Nets, throughout the rest of his career? Was it kind of just a, if KD's here, I'm here type of thing? What did that kind of look like? Because when he originally had signed, it seemed like it was like this was it. He wanted to be here. He wanted to end here. Like that was kind of the vibe that a lot of us were getting in that chat.
You asking me, the man with no sources?
I was going to actually touch base on that too, because so many people are on that. So many people are on that, but yet you seem to be right every single time.
So this is what I'll say. I won't talk about private conversations that he's had. I want to respect our relationship as journalist and player. But what I will speak to is just over the years in covering him and things that we've discussed, more along the lines of even his growing up, in West Orange and growing up watching, Jason Kidd, Richard Jefferson, Kenyon Martin.
I used to sit courtside at the Nets for $40 when they were awful back in Jersey.
That McDonald's pack, you had that whole setup.
That was it.
And so, I know that Kai has often, I'll say, enjoyed watching those guys play. And even, Byron Scott was the coach of that team, and then he ended up going to Cleveland. I think there's always been a respect for that organization. And in addition to that, just having a love and a respect for the New York metropolitan area, and his dad and his godfather being, court legends at large. But as it relates to staying here, I think he's kind of proven his loyalty or his love for the city and in New Jersey specifically by, where he lives. And then also putting his friends in position that are his childhood friends, and they do things seen and unseen. And in addition to that, I think the only other time where you've seen somebody home, quasi home, and playing for the Nets, you saw it with Lance Stevenson, but it doesn't have the same effect because the Brooklyn Nets are not an original team. Yeah. The Nets originated in Long Island, but ultimately they found their way to Rutgers and then to Newark and East Rutherford as well. So this is the first time you've kind of seen somebody who, from the Kidd, Martin, Jefferson era, profess their love for a team, but it still is a business. And I think that the business, unfortunately, was the New York City mandates, and ultimately Eric Adams' stance, and before that, Mayor de Blasio and his stance on just all of those things. And so I look at this situation as unfortunate because I see Yankees logos in the background, and I feel like this is so much bigger than just Kyrie Irving. It's also, you look at the Yankees and you look at the Mets and their money, and I think Aaron Judge is in a contract year, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not a baseball guy, but I know enough to hold.
Yeah, he's up for it right now. Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad I got that right. So, as it relates to just monetarily how that would affect the borough of the Bronx, the borough of Queens, and then ultimately, the borough of Brooklyn too with Kyrie. I mean, when he's there, he's an impact player. It's a lot to digest. And my fear, honestly, nothing I've heard, just observing, is that, okay, you look at all of the things that are going on in the world right now with these cases going up, you see monkeypox and some of these other things. That mandate from Mayor Eric Adams, from what I understand and everything I've read, is temporary. Who's to say that in the fall and the winter, we don't go back to that once baseball is over?
That's when I moved back to South Carolina, because that's where my parents are at right now. I can't do another mandate, but it's tough around here, especially with how quickly cases rise. It's definitely a struggle to even try and handle that. But you mentioned availability too, and how, the games missed were really on the front office's end. If you were to look as a front office, where we as fans are confused is, how are you not looking at all the games he was eligible to play? He didn't miss a single game that he was eligible for this season, including playoffs. I know that he had that the rolled ankle over in Portland. He didn't miss a game for that.
And when he got hurt in Miami in February too.
Yeah. So there's multiple cases where in a regular season that he's, playing those 60, 70 games, he's going to take that, 1 to 2 games off or a thing like that. He proved just by even coming and even in the fact that he was practicing the whole year, right? When they opened up the facility as a public or I'm sorry, as a private entity, he was practicing the whole season. So that's where the level of loyalty I'm confused with is, how are you not looking at that as he wants to be here? We should lock that up long term.
Because it's still a business. And if you're not available, why are you here? Is probably how they're looking at it.
Okay.
And you also have to keep in mind this, at the point when the Nets made him eligible to play, if I'm not mistaken, partially he was made available because COVID was kicking their butts and everybody was on the injured reserve list. So that was
another
still
thing too is with once Aaron Judge came out and said he was unvaccinated, within 2 weeks that mandate got lifted. You can see the pull that the Yankees and the Mets get because they're the bigger sports franchises in New York. If say Kyrie was on the Knicks, I would think honestly that gets lifted because the Knicks are a more respected team in New York when it comes to the respect level that people have. A lot of people like to say that you're the New Jersey Nets, stay over there type of thing. But
the Knicks is a conversation for a different day, and we don't have enough time to discuss them.
We do not, not at all. Well, so going into the next one, I wrote these questions a couple of days ago, so they may be a little lopsided. The next one was, with the current state of the Nets, what direction does it likely seem? If you had to bet the house on what's going to happen come training camp, are Kyrie and KD there? Or is it just Kyrie there? Is it just KD?
I think they're both there.
You think they're both there? Okay. All right. And now when it comes to repairing that relationship, right, because this seems more of a KD and Kyrie versus a Sean Marks and Joe Tsai thing. I think Steve Nash is kind of just caught in the middle there because he's done, from, again, a fan's perspective, not too good of a job since being there, right? So I'll just say it. You don't got to say it.
I said nothing. I'm listening.
Listen, I'm a fan first. I'll always speak my opinions, always. As a fan, he has not done it. But is it more of a Kyrie and KD versus the front office type of deal, or is it more of a pride thing, mainly on the front office's end?
It depends on who you ask. I think when you look at Kyrie and KD, they've always been a package deal coming to Brooklyn. And I think I got that hunch during All-Star Weekend in Charlotte in 2019 when I spent some time with them. And they spent a lot of time together that weekend, but they have been building a rapport that whole season. When Kai was a Celtic and Kev was a Warrior. I mean, even when the Warriors came to town, and I know Kai's chef, Corey, was cooking up some plant-based dishes that Kevin enjoyed. And it just was an ongoing conversation. And that even goes back to a vacation that Kev and Kai's friends, as well as what those guys took, and they kind of conjured this idea of potentially being teammates. And they actually entertained the option of, the Brooklyn Nets. And so I think this goes back. And I think also when you look at just Kyrie getting a lot of people to come, both Kai and Kevin recruited people to come, either even before they got there and once they got there. I'll say this the most gentlest but respectful way possible. I think as much as people praise Sean Marks for what he's done, I think none of Kevin Durant coming to Brooklyn would have been possible without Kyrie actually recruiting him to get there. And I'll leave it like that.
As fans, we've kind of caught on to that over the last year and a half, I'd say, is Kevin Durant's or Kyrie's pull is really what made this franchise, which is, again, why it's so just disheartening to see what's going on. So it's just it's tough. But
I'll add this. Kevin Durant is the reason why Andre Drummond even entertained the Nets, even though he was brought in via trade when he was a free agent prior. I know for a fact, and speaking to someone with direct knowledge of a phone call, Kevin Durant called Drummond, and when Drummond was considering the Lakers, and said, "Yo, come to Brooklyn." And ultimately he made other arrangements. And so when he was traded there, ultimately it went in the way that it was supposed to go when he was traded from Philly to Brooklyn. But he entertained the idea a season prior. I just think ultimately it's an all season. Players hang out, but players also like to unwind. I don't play in the NBA, but I work for an organization, and the season is over. Sometimes I don't feel like talking to my coworkers. But when I hear from them, we text and we have good conversations. So it's the same thing. This is still a job.
Yeah.
And it's just something that is a public job where people's salaries are public knowledge, and transactions are a popcorn and ticketed event for people, and it gives people jobs to release that information.
Yeah. And now, moving on kind of away from those two, when it comes to the Nets, I know that Joe Harris's name has been brought up recently. I heard that the Nets aren't looking to move him. Are there any trades that kind of haven't hit social media yet, any of the major news stations that are kind of like in the works? Any players they're targeting? Anybody else they're looking to sign via free agency? Because we are probably about a big man away, I would say, as long as Kyrie and KD were to stay.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, and this kind of goes back to like 2021. This was like, I remember 2 days after I tweeted that stuff about Kai and I just don't want to play. I had gotten some intel from someone in Atlanta that had indicated that the Nets were interested in John Collins, and I know that Atlanta has done a lot since then in fortifying their roster and getting DeJounte Murray from the San Antonio Spurs in a trade. So I know the Nets have eyed John Collins for a while, and you kind of saw what he can do in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. But ultimately, I haven't really heard anything new concerning Joe Harris. I know in speaking to certain folks on the net side of things, their hope is that they can pair both he and Seth Curry together to make them this shooting maestro, if you will, specifically when you look at or you count on Ben Simmons' health. That Ben Simmons still does command that double team, can kick out of the double team to an open man on the corner. And that's where you see Seth and Joe Harris lined up. But like I said, if you have an opportunity to get better, I think you do that. I think when you look at the Nets roster overall, Nicholas Claxton, to me, I've seen flashes of brilliance in his connectivity with Kyrie out of the pick and roll. You saw it at times in the wall that Boston built around Kyrie and Kevin defensively in their schematics, how often Nicholas Claxton was open. So I know that you said that they're big men away. I do like Nicholas Claxton still going into the season. I think the Nets have been searching for a big man ever since they made that big trade and a couple years ago to get Harden. So yeah, I feel you on that, but that's the latest that I have. John Collins has been somebody they've been eyeing for a while, but if you have the opportunity to keep Joe Harris and Seth Curry and, you pair them alongside, I guess if you're going small, if you're playing small ball with Ben Simmons, at the point, he's got a vantage point over your opponent's point guard and can direct traffic that way. So we'll see.
So is there any update on Ben's health? Because I know that he went through the surgery. He's posting again on social medias. He looks like he's happy.
Every time I talk about Ben Simmons, I get in trouble. So I'm going to tell you now.
I hear you. Well, so this is an added on question I had to add because of all the news with today. You mentioned briefly that the Celtics talk you think is kind of old. What is the realistic possibility of because a lot of people are speculating. My personal offer that I would take is Brown and Robert Williams. Maybe an extra piece. I know that they offered Brown and Derek White, whether it was this morning or it was 2-3 weeks ago. Is that a real threat, or is that kind of just distant?
I think it gets interesting because the Nets are going to look like idiots trading within the Atlantic division. They did it with Philly to trade Harden. I think you did it and be done with it. If I'm the Nets, I'm asking for everything. I'm asking for Robert Williams. I'm asking for Jaylen Brown. I'm asking for Marcus Smart, and I'm asking for 3 first-round picks. I tweeted that earlier today. If you're the Nets, you're not just giving up Kevin Durant, and to be honest with you, that seems to be the general consensus. On both sides. I've walked you guys through behind the scenes as it relates to the Pelicans. I've walked you through the Suns. I've walked you through the Lakers. I've walked you through a myriad of other things. So, if the Nets want to do that, they need to be asking for a huge overhaul for guys not named Jason Tatum if you're trading with the Boston Celtics.
and I know Zoom has a 40-minute time limit for some reason, but the last two that I wanted to ask, I got to get the joke out of the way. The sources, what is up with the sources? Why is it that nobody believes you from the start? Like, is there any like specific sources that you can give, or is there, you got to keep that kind of in the kitchen talk?
I mean, this is what I'll say to you. I think, in 2019 specifically, when I definitely got Kawhi going to the Lakers wrong, and it wasn't really wrong. He changed his mind.
Yeah.
I think people run with that. And I think that unfortunately on Twitter, and just in life, people will scream your wrongs, but will whisper your rights. And I don't have anything to prove to anybody. And I think it's really, amongst my friends and everybody else, a joke. The fact that people do question it, because I don't really think they could do what I do or be in my position for a minute, let alone days.
Yep.
I think it would be pretty hard to keep going with this charade for a whole month of July if I didn't know anything. But that's not really my job. My job is to storytell. I might get information because I have relationships. I don't just break news. I interview people. I tell stories. I do stuff in multiple platforms. So, if that's what people want to say about me, I don't have a response. I just let my work talk for me.
And it's been proven the last couple of months. I mean, even in the past years, I'm kind of newer to Twitter, so but I've been following you over on Instagram for a while, for the most part. I mean, with media especially, things change, and I don't think people understand that. Like, one person can say they're going there, they're about to go there, and immediately flip their mind, like kind of like Kawhi. So when it comes to media, it's a
Kawhi. The only reason why Kawhi Leonard did not go to the Lakers was because ultimately, right before he agreed to sign, if you remember, many of the major players had already agreed to what teams they were going through. If you remember, the Los Angeles Clippers and the Oklahoma City Thunder had agreed to a trade in principle for Paul George. Yeah. Paul George ultimately was traded to the Clippers. If Paul George wasn't traded to the Clippers, Kawhi would have been a Laker. And I'll add this, even as it relates to Paul George, that particular season, I had broken a story that did not become like national mainstream until months later when Paul George tore his rotator cuff in Oklahoma. I had that like in April or May of 2019. Oh, wow. That didn't become something that was news until like July or August.
Yeah, it was after
that year because he had surgery on both rotator cuffs. And I actually ran into him at a party, and he was like, "Yo, that was you?" He said, "Well, damn, your sources were right. You were 100% spot on." So this business is hit or miss. I'm usually more hit than miss, but I think if somebody's first impression of me is he got Kawhi wrong, well, then he's wrong about everything. I get it. That's just not true, though.
Yeah. And now with the 48, right? You've been saying 48 a lot. We have the 48 hours thing going. You recently posted it again today. Is there a new 48, or is that just kind of like...
Do you know what 48 means?
No.
All right. So I was on vacation, and a buddy of mine asked me to come on his Twitter Spaces. And so I started talking about, the Nets doing this, not doing that, and not doing this. And I went on somebody's, my boy Saint Nets. I went on his Spaces and said,
I was there that night. Yeah.
I said that Kyrie and KD want this. They want this. They want this. They got 48 hours to respond. And I hung up. So then I just started tweeting number 48 over. And they're like, what the hell is he talking about? So
everybody in the comments always is like, what does it mean?
It was really no rhyme or reason. Was I playing? Yeah. But at the same time, when it comes to like information related to everything going on, it's been spot on. But you also got to remember, it's a lot of people that are all trying to push their agendas and get their point across at the same time. How do you stand out? So 48 was something I did. And then I remember when I was on Local Picks 11, I put 7-11 at 11 on 7-10. And people were like, what the hell is he talking about? I was just talking about Kyrie and KD on Channel 11.
I remember seeing that, and I ended up screenshotting and sending it to our Kyrie chat. I was like, oh my God, something's about to happen. Like, here it goes. and all of us were just like, oh, come on.
It was getting people's attention. My intent wasn't to be misleading. It was funny as shit, but at the same time, everything that I've had that I felt comfortable sharing, I've told y'all, and I wouldn't lie. And sometimes if I don't feel comfortable speaking about it, I'll tell you.
Awesome. And with the final question, I know it's 3 minutes. It's already showing me a timer. Steve Nash, you know, we saw it with the Celtics. They ended up moving Brad Stevens up to the front office. Is that ever a possibility where the players, they come back and they're kind of just like, this isn't working, like move him up, get us somebody new? Is that even like a thing that could be talked about yet, or is that not even in the picture?
For the Nets specifically?
Yeah.
I think Brad Stevens was in a different situation in Boston specifically because Danny Ainge was on his way out.
Yeah.
Brad Stevens also learned a lot of tricks of the trade from Danny Ainge before he ultimately got a front office job in Utah. I don't see Steve Nash replacing Sean Marks, but I do think that as it relates to the Nets at large, I think as much as people are looking at Kevin Kai, I do think that they're going to be eyes on Steve Nash this year differently than years before. So I think that in answer to your question directly, I don't think that it would be a Brad Stevens comparison. I think if Steve Nash is gone, they would either bring in Jacques Vaughn, who is, you know, a highly paid as a lead assistant coach within the organization. But, you know, you speak to people throughout the league. Like I've asked certain guys, yo, could you see the Nets bringing you as an assistant? They're like, nah, I don't see that. I'm not their type of guy. You know, even Ime Udoka was an assistant with the Nets and they passed him over and he ultimately became, you know, a lead assistant or a head coach rather with the Celtics. But I think that was long overdue. You know, he was an assistant in Philadelphia under Brett Brown. They all come from the San Antonio coaching tree and what have you. So in answer to your question, in 5 seconds or less, no, I don't see a similar comparison there.
Awesome. Well, that's all I got for today. I appreciate your time. As always, I hope to do this in the future. I'll definitely be reaching out too. I'm trying to network certain areas around just locally, anybody that I can kind of, even if it's an internship, just trying to, anybody that I can get a hold of. So, but I appreciate your time and definitely looking forward to the next one.
All right, brother. You want to talk to me with no sources? Me?
I'll make sure to clip it. All right.
All right, my brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, you as well. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.